Morning. I was delighted to be asked to speak at this conference, not least because the subject is one which is dear to my heart, but I also have a great love of Spain and the Mediterranean countries, their history and their culture, and I'm familiar with some of the projects that are going to be spoken about during the course of the day. The subject of integral heritage is at the very heart of what the National Trust was formed for, and is as relevant to the Trust today as it was in 1895 when the Trust was first established. However, it's a tall order to talk about 115 years of conservation work and summarise this in 45 minutes. And in order to do so, I will give a brief background to the history of the National Trust and then focus on some current case studies. The National Trust was founded in 1895 by Canon Hardwicke Rawnsley, who was a devotee of William Morris and John Ruskin. Octavia Hill, at one time a pupil of John Ruskin, and Robert Hunter, a solicitor with an interest in the conservation of public spaces. It specifically set out to play a particular part amongst a concert of players, writers, artists, conservationists and social reformers, seeking to make a better world for all men and women at the time when society was being exploited by the few at the expense of the many during the Industrial Revolution. Its distinctive role would be to own land and buildings on behalf of these people. This was a remarkable and bold step, the symbolic power of which was not lost on their contemporaries. The enclosure of land from the 17th to the 19th centuries had progressively excluded people from common land and concentrated the ownership of land in the hands of major landowners. This was paralleled in other areas of production where cottage work had moved to larger and larger factories in cities, causing mass migration, the loss of traditional crafts and the depletion of rural communities. The Trust was part of a movement for social reform whose philosophical leader was William Morris, who described himself as a socialist and revolutionary. His influence permeates the early Trust. Much of his writing is concerned with ideas being discussed by the Trust founders, and to quote him, "Beauty, which is what is meant by art, using the word in its widest sense, is, I contend, no mere accident to human life, which people can take or leave as they choose, but a positive necessity of life. Or, I do not want art for a few, any more than education for a few, or freedom for a few." And in relation to the countryside, when we get beyond the smoky world, there, out in the country, we may still see the works of our fathers, yet alive amidst the very nature that they were wrought into, and of which they are so completely a part. For there, indeed, if anywhere, in the English country, in the days when people cared about such things, was there a full sympathy between the works of man and the land they were made for. The land is a little land, too much shut up within the narrow seas, as it seems to have much space for swelling into hugeness. There are no great wastes overwhelming in their dreariness, no great solitudes of forests, no terrible untrodden mountain walls. All is measured, mingled, varied, gliding easily one thing into another. Little rivers, little plains, swelling speedily changing uplands, all beset with handsome, orderly trees. Little hills, little mountains, netted over with the walls of sheep walks, all is little, yet not foolish and blank, but serious rather, and abundant of meaning, for such as choose to seek it. It is neither prison nor palace, but a decent home. This slide shows the trespass of Kinder Scout. Kinder Scout was common land with many footpaths crossing it, and it was being increasingly enclosed by the landowners of the time and protected as a grouse moor by their gamekeepers. And it borders the industrial cities of Sheffield and Manchester. And these were some of the steelworkers from Sheffield, just a few of them, because there was, in 1932 there was a mass demonstration on Kinder Scout, which basically gave right to the Countryside Act, of which rights of way and rights of freedom for everyone to actually roam on the moors were established. And it was the intent of the Trust in 1895 to be distinctly for the benefit of the people. These were very much the people that Octavia Hill had in mind when the Trust was formed. The original Act of Parliament could have omitted the people side and just focused on preservation, but it did not. Natural beauty is important for the soul, history important for the mind. This is what makes the Trust truly distinctive. It is the odd yoking of natural beauty, nature in the title of this conference, with historic interest, culture, which is then tied to a purpose which is for the benefit of the people. In the National Trust we have history and beauty joined together because they are good for people. People need both. History and beauty matter. This is mainstream William Morris. And this is a picture, an image of Kinder Scout today, as you now see it. From a tiny garden, which was called Say's Court, which was created by the 17th century diarist John Evelyn in the heart of Deptford in East London, the National Trust now owns and manages 147 registered gardens of special historic interest, over 200 historic houses, 47 industrial monuments and mills, 12 lighthouses, 35 pubs, the sites of many factories and mines, 19 castles and chapels, 57 villages, 25 medieval barns and 2 theatres. The total insurance reinstatement value of our historic buildings is approximately £6 billion. It also protects and preserves over 1,194 kilometres of coastline and over 247,000 hectares of land. Many of the buildings owned by the National Trust are categorised as listed, but even those without this formal grading, which relates to the significance of individual buildings, are significant in the way they contribute to the character and appearance of local places. National Trust countryside property is designated at many levels, including national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and sites of special scientific interest. Objects in the National Trust collections vary from those that are of international significance. This is a replica of the Sutton Hoo Mask, which was discovered near Woodbridge on the site of the burial ground of the first kings of England. They also go from this international significance to those of national and local significance, to the everyday items that are essential part of the fabric and social history of places. We're also supported by generous gifts and legacies, which amounted to over £60 million last year, and also to a huge legacy of time. In 2013, over 60,000 volunteers gave more than 4 million hours of their time. And this was in a range of roles, from house and garden guides, volunteer gardeners and volunteer rangers in the countryside, to those helping with the development of our digital channels and also working in our shops and in our offices. And now, in a very small snapshot of our work, I'd like to concentrate on a few case studies of projects being undertaken today and some of the challenges that the National Trust faces. In August 2013, the National Trust joined forces with the Woodland Trust to purchase and restore Fingal Woods, which span the River Tyne in Devon. Over £3 million was raised through a joint fundraising campaign. The National Trust will take care of 61.4 hectares of the 334 hectare wood on the edge of Dartmoor, situated between two National Trust properties, Castle Drogo and Steps Bridge Wood. The National Trust, in partnership with the Woodland Trust, aims to improve public access to this beautiful part of Dartmoor that has not previously been accessible to the public. Ancient woodlands such as Fingal Wood are valuable habitats for many species of birds, insects, animals and plants. The conservation value of the woodland will be greatly enhanced by clearing conifers to let the native species regenerate. Some 27 miles of footpath will be created through the woods, giving visitors the opportunity to see long forgotten sites, including an Iron Age hill fort at Worcester Castle and the hidden valley at Hall's Cleeve. Will also provide the chance to encounter huge wood ant nests, watch for birds of prey, including buzzards and sparrowhawks, and spy on kingfishers and otters at the Weir Pool on the River Tyne. I don't know how many of you watched Big Brother. I don't know whether it's actually got as far as Spain or a version of it. But this was part of the London project which the Trust ran, which was an experimental effort to reach younger and metropolitan audiences in the capital of London. It continued to surprise, sometimes delight, and occasionally outrage. The media coverage that we got of the opening the Big Brother house as a special site was certainly divided opinion. In total, over 60 events, large and small, were staged, ranging from theatrical dining at our properties to film shows, beer festivals, garden games, singles nights, and tours on our own Route Master bus, following the steps of John Betjeman, one of the writers and poets of England. We also had partnerships ranging from 10 Downing Street's garden being opened, which is the home of our Prime Minister, to Somerset House, where Stanley Spencer, one of the famous war artists, attracted nearly 80,000 visitors in 8 weeks. And then there was also Octavia Hill's orchard, planted in the South London housing estate. The London project reached over 200,000 people through branded events, and the media hubbub over the opening of the Big Brother house for a weekend, according to independent estimates, reached 79% of all UK adults, an average of 12 times each. And of course, the power of social media is one that we as an organisation use extensively. This is Castle Drogo, which is a country house in Devon in the southwest of England. It's a 20th century castle which was designed by Edwin Lutyens for Julius Drew, and it was the last castle in Britain to be made entirely of granite. In 1974, the Drew family donated Castle Drogo to the National Trust with 243 hectares of the surrounding estate. In the winter of 2012, a major conservation project began to make Castle Drogo watertight for the first time in its history. The flat roofs had originally been covered with asphalt, but for over 80 years water had leaked and caused extensive damage in the building. The windows also leaked and the walls needed to be repointed. Without remedial work, the castle would have been uninhabitable within 10 years. The conservation work required was on a large scale, and repairing a roof as large as 2 football pitches required the construction of a complex scaffolding system and temporary roofed enclosure. Castle Drogo remains open during conservation work, with a scaffold viewing platform giving visitors a chance to view the conservation at first hand. Inside the building, rooms to the south have been emptied of their objects in preparation for the restoration, allowing new exhibitions to be set up. These include a replica of Castle Drogo, built from tea chests, as well as other installations looking at the way the Drew family lived, how the castle was built, and the impact of the First World War on construction, using a collection of letters and drawings from the castle archive, which is scattered throughout the castle. The project has been made possible thanks to support of the Heritage Lottery Fund, the Walsam Foundation, the Country Houses Foundation, the Headley Trust, and a public appeal supported by thousands of individuals. High Peak Moors in the Peak District in the centre of England covers some 10,000 hectares of moorland around Kinder, the area where I showed you the image of the trespass earlier on. In September 2013, the Trust launched the High Peak Moors Vision and Plan, a 50-year project to enhance and restore landscape and wildlife habitats and provide a wide range of public benefits. These include public access, engagement with nature, better water quality, and improved carbon capture and storage in soils. The Trust continues its work of planting cotton grass and blocking gullies to stabilise bare and eroding peat. Work will continue to reintroduce trees and shrubs, manage grazing, re-wet peat bogs, and encourage diverse wildlife. And again, most of this work is underpinned by volunteers. Hafferty Clan is a historically important farm of the flanks of Snowdon in Wales. It's farmed in hand by the National Trust. The wider estate is a national nature reserve, home to Welsh mountain sheep, Welsh black cattle, feral goats and rare plant species. A large hydroelectric turbine has been under construction at Hafferty Clan for many months, the National Trust's first large-scale renewable energy scheme. And this is in the middle of Snowdonia, one of the most important national parks in Wales. I have to be careful with my regionalisation after the Scottish referendum. And it's a hydroelectric turbine which will capture 0.5 tonne of water per second and will generate up to 1,900 megawatts per hour per year, which is enough electricity to light up the 8 historic houses, 3 castles and 45 holiday cottages that the Trust looks after in Wales. We've set up a new company, the National Trust Renewable Energy Limited, in order to sell energy to other partners. And we're doing that through another company called Good Energy Limited. Money raised from this project will be used to fund other conservation projects in the Trust. And it's a large step towards fulfilling the Trust's renewable energy plans to provide clean energy to 43 of its properties and to create sustainable energy solutions that work in harmony with the environment. The hydroelectric turbine was officially switched on in April 2014. The Honeycutt estate in Somerset consists of nearly 5,000 hectares of Exmoor National Park. It is a diverse landscape made up of wild moorland, shingle beaches, ancient woodland, rivers, salt marsh and villages. A multi-objective flood management project is underway at Honeycutt, supported by two government organisations, DEFRA and the Environment Agency, and managed by the National Trust. The project aims to demonstrate that by working at the catchment scale and changing land management practices, a sustainable approach to flood management can be achieved whilst producing wider environmental and community benefits. And this was some of the flooding experienced in the valleys below, the plains below, in 2013. Results have shown that approaches to retain and slow down water upstream can both protect communities and provide opportunities for creating new and improved habitats for many species. By holding water at strategic locations so that it was released slowly after intense and prolonged rain, flooding was prevented in the nearby villages of Allerford and Bossington. And these findings are being shared with partners and other organisations at a national level. Leith Hill Place is an elegant 17th century house, and it's an estate in Surrey which has been the home to several influential families. The house was owned by the Wedgwood family, who are famous potters and industrialists in England in the Industrial Revolution, and their pottery, I think, is sold worldwide. And the most famous of them, Josiah Wedgwood, home was here. It was also regularly visited by their relative Charles Darwin, who conducted research and experiments here in the garden. Composer Ralph Vaughan Williams lived in the house in the late 19th century, and he gave the property to the Trust in 1945. Leith Hill Place opened to the public for the first time in July 2013. Interpretation inside the house is minimal, giving the property a relaxed and informal atmosphere, and a soundscape has been installed into the attic rooms. Part audio guide and part art installation, the soundscape is a shared experience where groups of visitors are guided through a series of rooms, listening to narration, contemporary letters, and music by Vaughan Williams and others. The property is what we call a work in progress, and visitors were given the chance to see the house in transition and share their views on the future presentation. Project Wild Thing. The National Trust wrote a report called Natural Childhood, which was published in 2012, which highlighted the increasing disconnection between children and nature in the United Kingdom. As part of the response to this problem, the Trust has helped launch an initiative called the Wild Network. This is a movement of over 1,500 organisations and 6,000 individuals from across the conservation, play, health and education sectors. It champions connection with nature and wildness in children and young people. And in 2013, the Trust supported the release of Project Wild Thing, which was a feature-length film which took a light-hearted but revealing look at the problem of children's diminishing connection with nature. The Trust has run a successful 50 Things to Do Before You're 11 3/4, which is a list of the best outdoor adventures for children, and has run for 3 successive years and is immensely popular with families that visit the National Trust. Lindy Isaf, and if any of you are better Gallic speakers than I am, then forgive me. But it's a 248 hectare in-hand farm in the Gwynant Valley in the heart of Snowdonia. The upland farm features in Welsh mythology. Dinas Emeris on the estate is said to be the site of an epic battle between a white dragon and a red dragon, which is now the national emblem of Wales. In 2011, the Trust launched a successful appeal to purchase Lindy Isaf and the surrounding area to preserve it for future generations. In 2014, with the support of the Wales Federation of Young Farmers Clubs, the Trust offered a scholarship allowing one young person the opportunity to manage Lindy Isaf for a year. And that's the lady shown here, a lady called Carol Hughes, who's 23, and her sheepdog Mist won the scholarship at the Royal Welsh Agricultural Show. And Carol will manage Lindy Isaf for 1 year as part of the wider in-hand farmed estate, developing her skills in stock management, business and practical farm management. Knoll, which is this is where I'm currently working, is considered to be one of the great noble houses of England, and its story spanning over 500 years also make it one of the most extraordinary. Surrounded by a medieval deer park, Knoll is vast in scale. Its roof measures 7 acres, which is about 4.5 hectares, and the building itself sits alone on about 2.5 hectares. Its remarkable complex of stone ranges are set around 7 courts, which with its turrets and gables has been likened to a medieval town. And Virginia Woolf, when she was writing Orlando, which was basically her sort of love story to Vita Sackville West, who couldn't inherit Knoll because she was a woman, and we have these strange traditions in England, which are, I think, actually shortly to be changed. But Vita Sackville West, who of course one of the great writers in England, was devastated that she couldn't inherit the estate of Knoll. And so Virginia Woolf, who was her lover at the time, wrote the book Orlando, and she described it in that book as more like a town than a house. Though its size suggests large organic growth, it actually remains larger as it was built in 1610, built by the Archbishops of Canterbury in the later 15th and early 16th century, and dramatically recast by Thomas Sackville, who was the first Earl of Dorset, in a few astonishing years from 1605 to 1608. The Sackville family has lived there ever since, with the National Trust accepting ownership and responsibility for its care in 1946. It is physically the largest private home in England and the only one of its scale to remain, retaining all of its accretions and preserving substantial medieval elements. The Inspired by Knoll is a major programme of repair and conservation work supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund, and is taking place between 2014 and 2019. It includes the repair and resurfacing of spaces historically shown to the public, including the introduction of conservation heating, insulation and new lighting, and the opening of new rooms to the public for the first time. A major programme of collections conservation is planned, supported by the creation of an on-site conservation studio. Building repairs and collections conservation specifications are being developed, together with plans to represent historic spaces and collections, and enhance the visitor experience through the introduction of new interpretation. We're working very closely with volunteers, with our local community, and a huge range of interested people from the London museums, local history groups, etc., on this particular project. The National Trust has also, well, it always has, but it's begun to speak out slightly more strongly than it has done in the last few years. And on the anniversary of the new National Planning Policy Framework, which is a piece of legislation recently introduced in England, the Trust highlighted many areas that did not have local plans in place, which made it harder for communities to influence development in their area. We published further research in December 2013 that showed over half the local authorities in England with Greenbelt land were preparing to allocate some of it for development, whilst brownfield sites were being overlooked. We continue to monitor how the National Planning Policy Framework is working in practice and the development of national planning policy guidance. Changes to the planning system have been part of a wider agenda to stimulate the economy through investing in new energy, housing and transport infrastructure. These types of infrastructure affect National Trust properties. We continue to work with central and local government and the private sector to try and manage these impacts from the High Speed 2, which is the new rail link from London to the Midlands, to offshore wind and for proposals for new roads. Our countryside is affected by planning and infrastructure, but also by the way public funding influences the management of land, particularly through the Common Agricultural Policy. I probably ought to be careful what I say at this point. But we have worked hard to influence the Common Agricultural Policy settlement for England and Wales and Northern Ireland, particularly to ensure that it provides public benefit by moving funding from direct subsidies towards projects that deliver more sustainable farming practices which will enhance our countryside and restore nature. So I hope with those examples I've been able to give you some sort of flavour of the work that the National Trust does and how it works in an integrated way with a wide range of partners celebrating both culture and history. And the Trust was and still is to be an organisation for the people. The rights of people not to be dehumanised, not to live in the grey poverty and the ugliness of the slums, and not to live in ignorance. People must have space and beauty because it is good for them, and they must have access to education and instruction, particularly in history. The Trust was to be about resistance to the impacts of capitalism and globalisation, and it was to be about improvement, about holding on to a better world and also self-improvement. The National Trust was founded as an organisation with a social purpose. If we were to rewrite that purpose today, it would probably be worded to promote the preservation and creation of places of beauty, both landscapes and buildings, informed by their history and the individual spirit of each place, for the benefit of all people. Thank you.